One of the biggest stories of the day, though, and announcements from the president, is that the president will invoke the Defense Production Act of 1950. Don't know what that means? Me neither. Luckily, we've got an expert here who can tell us. We are joined now by Cully Stimson. Cully is a widely recognized expert in national security, homeland security, crime control, drug policy, and immigration. A senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation since 2007, as Stimson became manager of the National Security Law Program in Heritage Davis Institute for International Studies in April 2013, after serving as Heritage's chief of staff for a year. That's a lot of qualifications. Hopefully, Cully will be able to tell us what this new policy decision means. Cully, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. So I saw this headline, and I can gather, I guess, from the words Defense Production Act, what this means, in a vague sense, that the president is now going to use the government to increase the rate of production in the United States. But what is this law? Why was it made in the first place? And why is it being invoked now?
Yeah, it has a neat history, frankly. Remember during World War II when you see those movies or those old newsreels where car manufacturer companies and other industries in the United States stopped making their regular goods and were making tanks and airplanes and all the rest of it? Well, that was under the War Powers Act 1. Then there was a War Powers Act 2, which allowed private industry and the industries of the United States to really turn their lend their shoulders into the war effort so we could win the war. After that happened, those authorities went away, but then Korea popped up. And so the Defense Production Act was passed by Congress as a way to put in statutory language, giving the president the authority to lean into the private industry and push private industry to help with the effort. Originally, it was designed obviously to help with national defense, but over the decades, Congress has expanded the definition of national defense, and it includes natural disasters and things like that. Mm-hmm. So the Act has 3 operative sections now and allows the president really to address issues. And it's been, by the way, Michael, it's been invoked over 40 times. So it's not a new thing that when the president invokes it. President Obama, in fact, invoked it.
You know, if you were just reading the mainstream news coverage of this today, you would think that this is the first time ever that this has been invoked, probably in 70 years. And you're saying Barack Obama did it. So this is not the big news story that people are making it out to be.
Well, it's big in the sense that this virus is on everyone's mind and that the president is trying to invoke the legislative tools given to him to use. But no, I mean, President Obama invoked it back in 2014 when we just didn't have enough body armor. And so he invoked it and then went to the companies that were making it and said, make more, and here's some extra funds, and here's some other tools you can have to ramp up production. And so it's been invoked, more than 36 times. And for good reason, because, when industry A or industry B just can't get the output of a widget or something, and it falls into the definition of a national defense or national tragedy, the president can push them to do it and then backfill the money so the industry is made whole.
So it seemed as though the White House was signaling that they were not going to use this, or they wouldn't be using this in the near future just a few days ago, and now President Trump is invoking it. Why do you think that changed, and specifically what will the administration be using this law for?
Yeah, so I'm not a public health expert. I'm just a lawyer and military guy. But from what I understand, and I think the way to answer the question is they don't know what they don't know, to quote my old boss. What they don't know is how many masks they're ultimately going to need, or how much medical equipment they're ultimately going to need, or how many ventilators they're ultimately going to need. And so more information is coming in from the states and from the localities affected by this, saying, on yesterday, we needed 20, now we need 50, now we need 70. And as you said at your opening, that information is coming very quickly.
Right.
And so I think between the president saying 2 days ago he may invoke it to the president saying he's invoking it, he's getting enough information to indicate that, especially in the medical equipment, ventilator, mask area, that the current supply and production levels aren't enough, so that those industries are going to need some help by the government to get backfilled, and other industries who can make those may be tapped to do just that and quit making what they're currently making, which also the Act allows.
You know, I'd like to zoom out a little bit and get some of your legal perspective here as well on these broader questions, because I'm in Los Angeles. I am now on lockdown, shelter in place. Luckily, though, and sort of incredibly, podcasting has been described as an essential service. So I guess I'm allowed to leave my apartment. I think I would probably dispute that description of podcasting is essential, but I'm glad to see it. A lot of people are writing in, though, and asking about all these government actions. If it's overreach, if it's illegal, if it's unconstitutional for the government to be basically saying these businesses have to shut down and you need to stay in your apartment. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do. It's actually in the Wall Street Journal today, an opinion piece that I co-authored by David Rivkin, with David Rivkin. And the answer is that the under our federal republic, as all your listeners know, the states have police power, not the federal government.
Right.
And the state governors are charged with providing for and taking care of the health and safety of its citizens. And so way back in 1805, the Supreme Court dealt with this issue in another context, in the context of smallpox. Jacobson against Massachusetts, the Supreme Court held that Mr. Jacobson, who did not want to be vaccinated with the smallpox vaccine, which existed at the time, could be forcibly vaccinated. He decided he didn't want to do it. He got prosecuted, convicted, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can do it. That the health of the many outweigh the individual temporary rights of the few who protest. And so these state quarantine orders, these state orders to isolate, these orders orders to not congregate more than 10 people, they're valid if it is based on a viable actual public safety and public health issue, and it seems obviously that it is. So as inconvenient as it is, it's important that we comply with that to suppress and ultimately defeat the virus.
Wow, that's so interesting that it goes back all this way, because I think you've got a lot of people, and look, I feel these kind of instincts as well, who say, this is America, stop forcing me to stay in my home.
Right.
But first of all, I didn't realize even vaccines as a public policy matter went back that far. There's a long history in the United States, a long legal history of these public health questions butting up against individual rights.
There is, and this decision that I was referencing earlier, Jacobson against Massachusetts, the majority opinion was written by Justice Harlan, and he said in a 7-2 majority, and this is important language to remember, quote, the Constitution does not import an absolute right in each person to be at all times and in all circumstances wholly freed from restraint. A community has the right to protect itself against an epidemic, and he goes on to say, its members, at times, under the pressure of great dangers, may be subjected to such restraint to be enforced by reasonable regulations as to the safety of the general public may demand, unquote. And so I think when you read the whole opinion, which I've read, first of all, it's not been overturned by the Supreme Court itself. It's never been reversed. And you look at the quarantine powers that each of the state's governors enjoy, including the right to order isolation in a situation like this, it's no fun. It's no good. It needs to end. But it also is clearly within the realm of what their legal authority is.
So we're talking now about the Defense Production Act. We're talking about broadly all of these measures that have been taken specifically by the state governments here. Is there any time limit on it? Because that's what I think a lot of people are writing in about. They're saying, look, I don't mind sitting around my apartment for a week if it's going to save a lot of people's lives. But what if this thing drags on 2 months or 3 months or even more? Is there any limit at which point we could say, listen, government, you've exceeded your powers and you can't keep us all locked down forever?
Well, I don't think we've gotten there. And I think that everyone is hoping and praying that there's a medical breakthrough or more knowledge about other drugs that can treat the symptoms before we get to the vaccine. But look, not only can the governors issue quarantine orders and isolation orders, they can activate their National Guard to enforce those quarantines. I certainly hope we don't get to that point.
Right. Me too.
And the president, under not only his constitutional authority, but under a particular act, which I referenced in our op-ed, can federalize the National Guards of the states and use the military not in violation of posse comitatus to enforce a national quarantine if we got to that point, so that people, you see these knucklehead teenagers running around the beaches in
South
Florida.
Beach, right.
Yeah, I mean, what a bunch of boneheads.
They didn't seem like they were exactly at a meeting of Mensa or anything when I was watching their videos go around the internet.
Well, we were all teenagers, right? I mean,
Right.
I get the impulse to do spring break, but please get over it. You know, get back into your home with your parents.
Right. Something tells me there's
there
not a
are-
whole lot of social distancing going on South Beach either, knowing what spring break is like.
No. And, you know, I'm all for spring break, but come on, this is a public health crisis.
Right,
And
right.
so, I mean, there are escalatory powers that the governors and the president can take if necessary to enforce these orders. I certainly hope, none of us hopes we get to that point. But to answer your question, how long can it go? It can go as long as necessary to quell the public health crisis.
Wow.
That's the problem. And no one I mean, we've only been at this a week.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine what's going to feel like a month from now? I mean, talk about national cabin fever.
Right. I know. You know,
we're
I
all
think
feeling it after a week.
I think for the first 3 days, everyone kind of likes it because it's different. It's dangerous. It's kind of like when the lights go out during a snowstorm and you're all kind of enjoying it even while you're complaining. But by that, third or fourth day, I think people are losing their minds. I texted a friend of mine. I said, "Hey, how are you and your husband holding up?" And she said, "I think we're going to kill each other before the virus ever gets to either of us." We have to take a break now. Cully Stimson. Cully, thank you so much for being here. You've really cleared up a lot, especially on the legal aspect of that. Find Cully over at the Heritage Foundation and in today's Wall Street Journal.